Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get started. It's about 2 minutes after the hour. I'm Robert McVay. I'm the senior consultant here at Smithers Information Security Services. And online helping keep me on the straight and narrow is Marjorie Clayman in the marketing department. And we're going to go ahead and jump. Today, we're going to be talking about how mobile devices create security risks for your organization, both the ones you provide as well as the ones your employees provide. We have to do this. This is the standard because we are an A and AB certification body, and we are accredited under 27001. We can provide this training as general training and guidance, and nothing from today's training can be construed as a guarantee or warranty for any audit, current, future, or past conducted by Smithers, that this will get you through that audit. There's going to be some discussion about the cybersecurity maturity model certification from the Department of Defense, and we are not approved nor considered information from the Department of Defense. We're just giving you our understanding of the rules for cybersecurity. If you have questions, please feel free to jump up into the Q&A. If Marjorie can answer them quick, she'll jump on them and attack them. If she needs me to jump in, I'll break contact on the discussion and switch over to them. In some cases, I may ask if we can just delay them till the end. All right. So let's jump right into it. A couple of interesting facts. I like to start with this one.
Robert, I'm sorry to interrupt you right away, but I did just want to let everyone know you are muted. So if you do have a question, the Q&A is the best way to get that to us. Thank you.
Good info. Perfect. All right. So let's take a look at smartphones. This is only U.S. data. First and foremost, the United States, we have about a population from 2023 of about 334 million people in this country. Interestingly, 92% of the population of the United States, or about 312 million of us, all have at least one cell phone. If you're like me, I have 3 of them because every one of my contracts wants me to have a different cell phone. Of those 312 million cell phones that are out there, about 243 million of them are owned by adults. About 78% of all the phones owned by adults. And here's an interesting one. This is where life gets interesting. Of those adults, the 243 million of them, at least 184 million of them make one weekly online transaction, at least one weekly. Some of them, many more. And when you put that all together, you're basically looking at, we use our cell phones about 67 billion times a year to make transactions. And that's just the United States alone. Part of that we raise that number is part of that is cell phones, and specifically smartphones, have become so ubiquitous, so common, that to see somebody on the street not carrying one, number one, is odd. To see somebody pull out like an old flip phone or a non-smartphone, you got to wonder, how do they communicate nowadays? So just a couple little hard facts about it. And this is what makes cell phones so difficult, and smartphones in particular, so difficult to combat when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, here's an interesting one too. This one I was really surprised about. The average age that we get our first smartphones is now down to 11. So keep in mind, most of the internet security privacy for children all says nobody below the age of 13 supposed to be on the network. But hey, we're giving our kids smartphones as early as 11 years old. So they are not knowing a time without one, number one. Number two, because they, again, are so ubiquitous, so widely spread, the ability for their abuse is very high. So let's take a look at which ones we have. So if you have a smartphone here in the United States, high probability, or about 60% probability, you're walking around with an Apple, 23% probability you're walking around with a Samsung, and then the remainder is you're walking around with somebody else's cell phone. Others, Motorola, Google, Xiaomi, LG, Huawei is in there as well. I mean, they're out there. Not too many of them are out there, but just to give you a heads up. A lot of what we'll talk about today is going to be focused on Apple and Samsung because you have the Apple iOS and you have the Samsung Droid environment. The other piece about it is that as Americans, we spend an average of 4.5 hours per day on our smartphones. That's quite a bit if you think about it for perspective-wise. The other important piece about it is that's the average. So there's definitely people who are spending a lot more than 4.5 hours, and some people spending less, but just consider. I would offer the next time you wonder if that number is even close to right, and you work just about anywhere with people that are at desks and even sometimes on machinery, which scares me at times, Go out and look at the number of people sitting there on their cell phones in front of their computer, or walk around in public and look at the number of people sitting on a park bench or sitting at a bus stop on their cell phone, as well as people walking down the street on their cell phones. How are they using them? Well, about 75% of them are doing text messaging and chatting. About 72% are actually doing email. 60+% of us all do our manage our finances on our cell phones. And then the last, then 60% of us are video streaming or music streaming, which means we're definitely putting demands on the system. But more importantly, it means we're using our cell phones for a lot of things that are out there. Now, this one's interesting, and this becomes why cell phones become such a risk, specifically smartphones become such a risk to the network. And that is the fact that 45% of all traffic across the internet and the web in the United States originates from a smartphone. That means that 4.5 hours for business people is probably a little bit low, because if 45% of all the traffic is coming from smartphones, that means we're doing a lot of business on our smartphones. Now, interestingly enough, the smartphone has about 3 or 4 problems that we don't normally see in many of our networks, but they're a little bit different. Social engineering, that has not changed. Social engineering on computers as well as smartphones is on the rise. I'll talk about each one of these in detail. Data leakage, information getting out. Wi-Fi interference is really for mobile devices only, unless you have a network. But out-of-date devices, poor password, mobile ad fraud is different, physical device breaches, a little bit unique for smartphones as well as mobile devices at large. So let's talk about what social engineering is. Social engineering is the ability to get you to give up your personal information and be happy about it. I mean, I kid you not, that's really kind of what it generates down to. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get information out of you. And they start off with phishing, smishing, and vishing. I swear a 12-year-old had to come up with this, having 5 of the 12-year-olds in my family at one time or another. The interesting things, but it basically says it's email, text, and video. Email for phishing, smishing is text, and video is vishing. What they're basically doing here is we've all gotten that email, that text message or that email that pops up on our screen and says, oh, by the way, your warranty is due, or hey, I'm the Nigerian prince and I have $15 million for you. That's kind of the old school. The more modern ones have gotten very sophisticated. In fact, we saw one about 2 weeks ago that said your Microsoft Office login for your company, and it had the right company name, is about to expire. Please scan this QR code and update your username and password. It was a phishing attempt. And if you clicked on that QR code or scanned that QR code, it'd pop up. It looked very much like Microsoft. It asks you for your username. It asks you for your current password. And then it asks you to change your password. And what it was actually doing is when you put in your current password, it was ignoring everything else, because at that point it had your username and your password. That's all they were asking for on jumping to. Spear phishing and whaling, this is targeted. Phishing, smishing, and vishing is just basically you saturate an entire company. Spear phishing or whaling, we're going after your CEO, we're going after your CFO, we're going after the high-profile people in your organizations. Now, phishing, smishing, and vishing, the best way to fix that, train your employees. The best way to fix spear phishing and whaling is not publish the bios for your senior leaders on your web pages. I mean, just about every company out there, publicly traded companies, they don't have a choice. They do have to actually publish those. Private companies, there's really no reason to be publishing, who owns the company or what their email address is, or, who they are, because once you give the hackers that information, then they pivot around and they start looking, so let's say Robert McVay owns the company. They're going to look up Robert McVay. Hey, Robert McVay owns socialengineering.com. The next phase for them is they go into the database out on the dark web and say, hey, is there anybody named Robert McVay associated with socialengineering.com? Yep, there are. Now they've got more information on it. Now they start building that profile. Now they start figuring out how to get to me. Baiting is the best one. Baiting is the one where you get that one. Most of us are familiar with this one. You get the one that says, hey, the extended warranty on your car is about to expire. Please contact us. Or the other one, my favorite one that always comes out in April is, your Internal Revenue Service debt is still outstanding from last year. Must be resolved by the 15th of April, or you'll be facing fines and penalty and arrest. Please call this number. Okay, first off, the Internal Revenue Service never calls you. The Internal Revenue Service always sends you letters, and those letters, tell you what to do. But if they're text messaging you or calling you, you're being baited. So just heads up on that one. Business email compromise. This has gone very much in vogue for the last few years, and it's really hard. Business email, we call it the CEO CFO fraud. This is typically the one where the CEO sends an email to somebody in finance and says, hey, we have an outstanding bill to socialengineering.com. Robert McVay really needs to get the $3,000 payment this week or today. Please make sure you use the following ACH information and get Robert his money today. It goes into the finance department, and typically it's targeted to the right person. It looks like it came from the CEO of the company. And if you don't have the right checks and balances in your system, where the finance transaction officer goes, wait a minute, stand by, picks up the phone and calls the CFO and says, hey, the CEO just said send Robert McVay $3,000. And if you want to do that, I'll give you my email and phone number. You can, send me that money today. But they go in and they don't check it. So this is big and common. You would say that this doesn't occur. When I retired from the military, I was over in Europe for about 2 years doing consulting in cyber with a company who actually lost a little over $250,000. Big company. I mean, we're not talking small company. We're talking multi-billion-dollar company. Lost $250,000 to a business email compromise that came in from their CFO that said, hey, we need to get on this right away. Get this opportunity locked in. Please transfer $250,000 by wire transfer to this company. Internal systems broke down. They sent $250,000 out the door. They never got it back because once it wire transfers out, that money is incredibly difficult to pull back. Pretexting. This is a great one. We've all gotten these. You get the phone call, don't know the number, good afternoon, and it starts off with, good afternoon, may I speak to Robert McVay? This is, hey, Mr. McVay, this is Bill with the Internal Revenue Service, or with your insurance company, or with your bank. Banking is a big one. We've noticed some fraudulent behavior on your account. I just want to confirm that you've got your bank card in possession with you right now. Do you have your bank card? Yes, I do. Sir, could you please confirm and give me the 16-digit number for that bank number and the code on the back to make sure that is the proper card? What they're looking for is they're asking for you to give them that information. And this is what they call pretexting. You get that call about potential fraud, that's what they're striving for. Scareware, this one kind of slides back into this one. You're surfing along, you go to a site, next thing it pops up says, your device has been used recently in a crime, or your device has been scanned and has determined that you have pornography, or you have, bomb-making information on your phone. Please click on the attached link. We need to talk to you immediately. Otherwise, this phone will be reported to the police. In all cases, they're creating a sense of urgency, a sense of doom, a sense of, hey, I've got to do something because I'm in trouble. Now, everybody says this only occurs on your personal devices. Absolutely not. Social engineering does not differentiate between company devices and personal devices. They target them all. And getting the list of cell phone numbers is not that complicated. Cell phone numbers, like regular phone numbers, come in banks. And so as a result, many times they will just blast this out to an entire bank of cell phone numbers, hoping that somebody will not pay attention to it. In the phishing and smishing or in the whaling, they got to do a little bit of work to get there. Simplest thing here to defeat any and all of these, if you have any doubt in your mind that it's not right, report it and delete it and then move on. Please do not forward. So if you get a business email, or you get a texting or a spear phishing or a phishing email, don't forward that email to your IT. Every one of us that works in a company that has a modern email system, there's a report. Just click on that, report it, delete it, or take a screenshot, but never forward that email, because when you forward that email, all you've done is reinforce the potential that somebody else downline is going to click on that email. Let's talk about data leakage. First and foremost, spear phishing and social engineering is all about getting your information, your credentials, to then inform the organization how to steal information from you. It's not that difficult. There used to be a time when we worried about passwords being broken. We don't worry about passwords being broken too much anymore. We worry more about passwords being stolen. A recent survey by IBM and Ponemon and Verizon all confirmed that if you have 100% remote workforce, your probability of data leakage is going up. And it's going up for a couple of big reasons. First and foremost, your employees are using either unapproved or untested software or devices. The devices come in if it's a bring your own device, BYOD. If they bring their own device and you don't have some method of scanning that device, monitoring that device, making sure you have no idea what software is on it. The other piece about it is even if you issue a corporate machine, if you don't have some sort of monitoring, some sort of protections on it to make sure that they can't upload or install software that they shouldn't. We call it whitelisting or blacklisting. Usually on computers, we call it whitelisting, meaning it's an approved list of software to be installed on that machine. If you are doing work for the Department of Defense, every mobile device in your organization, whether it's bring your own device or it's a corporate issued device, it must have a whitelist of what software is allowed to be installed on that machine. If you don't have that list, I guarantee you, you're going to fail your CMMC assessment. If you're doing an ISO 27001 or a CIS assessment against you, you're going to find that, again, by not having an approved whitelist of software, you're going to get a major nonconformance. So unapproved software, untested software, and devices are a critical way for them to get into the organization. For anybody who's not familiar with it, a couple of years ago, actually about 5 years ago, the city of Atlanta got hacked. 8.5 million computers were shut down for about 3 weeks. Atlanta lost the ability to pay tickets, pay fines, schedule court dates, issue any kind of licensing, etc. For about 3 weeks, they lost all of that. And the reason they lost that is they had an administrator who took his company machine home, hooked it to the dirty internet, went surfing out on the internet, picked up some nastiness on the internet, then brought that same computer back, plugged it back into the network so it was a trusted device inside the network, and then used his admin credentials to log in, which gave him broad access to the systems in Atlanta. And then the virus and the malware that he brought in populated throughout Atlanta. And it took about 48 hours, and 8.5 million machines and people were crippled and disabled for doing anything. So it's definitely a risk. Had the company, now, problem was he was an administrator, he should have known better, but had they had a whitelist in there that would have blocked different applications from being uploaded, because he actually went to a gaming site and downloaded some gaming stuff. So, that should never have occurred on the corporate machine. Insider threat. The guy in Atlanta, he's an example of an insider threat. While it wasn't nefarious what he did, he still created an insider threat. Insiders are about 80% of all cybersecurity events that occur inside of an organization originate from somebody inside. Somebody did something they weren't supposed to do, they didn't do something should have done, or they did something nefarious. Nefarious isn't as broad as most people think it is. It's the, I didn't mean to do that, I clicked on the spear phishing, oh, I should have changed my password, all those kinds of things. So your insider is still a major problem about data leakage. Human error happens. About 25 to 30% of all cybersecurity breaches occur because of human error. And I consider a spear phishing, you click on the link, that's human error. You made a mistake. You did something you shouldn't have done. Shouldn't have done it. The other part of human error is your IT professionals or people who maintain your systems. They don't do simple things like, they get a new firewall, they install the new firewall, and somebody forgets to change the default password from admin password 123. They forget to change it. It happens. When I was a certified hacker, and doing this, for pen testing, one of the biggest things we'd do, and about a third of the time we did it, we'd go to a new device or a device that recently had been updated or installed, and we would try the default admin password 123. And about 1 in 3 times, we actually got into those systems because somebody gets so busy they forget it. And it was usually organizations that got hit were the organizations that didn't have a process or a policy or a procedure in place to make sure it didn't happen. The other thing that impacts data leakage is no data loss protection. Nothing on your systems that says, hey, why are you moving a 5 meg file out of the company? Why are you moving a document that's marked confidential? Why is this leaving the company? And basically just monitoring whatever your employees are doing on data that is leaving the company as well as data is coming into the company. Everybody talks about privacy, but let me help you very shortly on this one. The US Supreme Court has ruled multiple times that if the device is provided by, maintained by, and funded by the company, there is no expectation of privacy on that device. So everybody says, well, I can't be monitoring my employees. Absolutely not correct. If the company provides the piece of equipment, pays for the piece of equipment, manages that piece of equipment. The company is entitled to scan and inspect anything that happens with that piece of equipment, whether it's on your network or off your network. So don't let that argument get too much in your way. We talked about this earlier. This is from the IBM cost of a cybersecurity breach. Basically in 2023, they're about a year out in date. If you're 100% remote workforce, you're looking at the cost of your breach for non-mega, and this is less than 500,000 records stolen. You're looking at the cost of that breach costing your company about an extra $137,000 on top of the $4.5 to $9 million the breach has already cost. So 100% remote workforce raises the bar for risk. Also, if you're doing CMMC, 100% remote workforce actually extends how difficult it is to inspect your organization, because I've got to demonstrate, or you as a company have to demonstrate that every one of those remote systems is properly protected. It's got data loss on it. It's got encryption at rest. It's got a whole lot of these features and monitoring. So just don't assume that just because nobody's working in the building, they're working remote, that your cybersecurity assessments, especially for the Department of Defense, are a lot weaker. All right, let's move on to Wi-Fi interference. Now, everybody who talks about Wi-Fi interference tends to think of Wi-Fi interference as my neighbors and my Wi-Fi are crossing over. And in mobile devices, what Wi-Fi interference actually means is that, like in this picture here, somebody is between you and the public Wi-Fi system. You're supposed to connect directly to the public Wi-Fi, but somebody's managed to get in between you and that device. This typically happens when you're using what are called unsecured networks. And by the way, a passworded public network, like in the airport or at Starbucks, where they have a sign that says, password is password 123 to get into the network, that is an unsecured network. And let me repeat that again. A passworded public network is still considered an unsecured network, because all you're doing is giving it a password to get into the network. But once you're into that network, everybody can generally see each other. So when you go to Starbucks and you pull out your corporate machine and you log in, you start surfing the internet and you didn't turn on a VPN, or you log into the corporate systems and you didn't turn on a VPN, everything you're doing on that machine is exposed. If there's a man in the middle, which we call this man in the middle here, I like this pirate, don't pay attention to me. I'm just watching what's going on. A majority, I don't know the number, but it's usually like 99.9% of all home and public Wi-Fis are improperly configured, meaning they don't have encryption turned on, they don't have a strong password, or the network that they're using is often the exact same network that, say, your printer is on, or the baby monitor in your kid's room, or your Internet of Things devices like your Alexa devices, or anything like that. Most home networks are not segmented, and therefore they're not configured properly. Most public Wi-Fi, like I said, if you're sitting in Starbucks, it's an open network. There's no encryption, typically. No, not typically. There is no encryption on that device, number one. And number two, when everything hits the back end of that Wi-Fi hotspot and goes into that common router, all the information gets jumbled up between all the users. So the ability to see that information is very simple and easy. Simple fix to that: never conduct sensitive communications on an untrusted network. So, short answer: you're sitting in Starbucks. The boss calls you and says, hey, I need you to take a real quick look at the proposal. Do not open the email. Do not log directly into your company. Put up a VPN, a virtual private network. Create a secure communication back to your company, and then open the document. But if you log in, he sends it to you, and you don't even do any of those, you just jump onto the email program, download a copy, you've just exposed your company to a very high level of risk. Same thing is going to happen. Like I said, if you have CMMC or ISO 27001 and you allow your employees to access the corporate network, conduct sensitive information, or conduct sensitive communications on an open network like that, you're going to get a major nonconformance on ISO 27001. And for CMMC, you're actually going to fail your audit at that time, which will impact your certificate and make life painful. If you have or conduct sensitive information or have a company computer and you're working routinely on untrusted networks, hotels are another example. No hotel has trusted networks in their system. It's as bad as Starbucks. It's all open, it's all Wi-Fi, it's all available. If you're on one of those networks, make sure you're running a VPN going back to corporate. Lots of VPNs. There's even a lot of free VPNs that small businesses can leverage and use. That VPN, at a minimum, make sure the communications between that computer and back to the corporate system is encrypted, so that if there is somebody in the middle of the network, the only thing they're seeing is a bunch of random ones and zeros. They're not actually able to hack your network. Now, I love this one. This came from Wandera back in 2022. Basically, it was that 4% of all public Wi-Fi hotspots have a man in the middle. Everybody says, it's no big deal. It's only 4%. Well, let me give you a little help on that one real quick. If you did that, and by the way, this is a global, not a US. If you did that, there's 8.5 billion branded hotspots around the globe. So if 4% of those are have a man in the middle, I mean, we're talking tens of millions of hotspots are compromised. So again, not necessarily a good thing. If you use Starbucks or you use McDonald's, I like Starbucks and McDonald's, by the way. They're great examples because both of them have Wi-Fi. Both of them offer it for free. Okay, there's about 22,000, actually it's 37,000, I'm sorry. It's about 37,000, almost 40,000 Starbucks and McDonald's enabled Wi-Fi hotspots here in the United States alone. So that means there's 1,600 of them have been compromised in some form, fashion, or other. So what's the probability you're going to walk into one of those 16 or 1,400 Wi-Fi hotspots? Probably pretty high. Cell phones, just like computers. If they're out of date, if the operating system is expired, if the operating system is no longer being supported, you're in trouble. I love this graphic. This is perfect. 1973, we had these bricks. They were pretty hard to hack because there was nothing to them. And then, slowly we've now made ourselves out to the, folding devices, etc. I know this is going to come as a shock. Your cell phone has an expiry date. And it's not just that the software starts running slow. It's not that the battery doesn't hold anymore. Short answer is that iPhone is committed to 5 years, but the average iPhone, somewhere between 4 and 8 years, they will stop supporting that iPhone. They will stop supporting the updates. That iPhone will no longer get software updates, patches, security updates. It stops. Samsung is somewhere between 3 and 6 years. Samsung phones Samsung and Huawei, the real challenge to them, we'll talk about this a little on, is that they are dependent not only on the phone, but on who is branded them, who their provider is. And then Google Pixel is kind of new to the game, about 3 to 5 years. But short answer is that if you have a cell phone, you can anticipate somewhere around 3 to 5 years, you're going to have to replace that cell phone because the operating system and the patching for it has now outdated, and there's no longer any patches for it. Jailbroke phones. I would say no company in their right mind should jailbreak a phone, because once you jailbreak the phone, you void all the warranties on it. Number one. The other problem is that in the BYOD, bring your own device, a lot of people will jailbreak their phones. What jailbreak a phone means is, if you're on iOS is a good example. If you're on Apple, a jailbroke phone will let you install software that you don't get from the App Store. On a Samsung, it'll let you install software and tweak some of the underlying settings for the machine. One of the reasons that those are in place is, one, the OEMs, they don't necessarily want their phones being used in nefarious or bad ways, number one. But there's another component to it too. A jailbroken phone means that bad things can be installed on that phone, or bad things can happen with that phone that the user may not even be aware of. So under no circumstances is a jailbroke phone ever considered secure or safe. Corporate, don't do it. The invalidation of your warranty and service agreement with both the cell phone provider as well as your cell phone service provider, that can cost you big time. Bring your own device. If an employee brings their own device, typically, and they want to hook into the company network, and like in our case at Smithers, we actually have you sign a user acceptance agreement that says that your personal device is not jailbroken and that you will not jailbroke it or install software that Smithers has said is bad software to install on your phone. So you can definitely stop it. I will tell you again, let's circle back. CMMC and ISO. If you have a jailbroken phone on your network, you will either fail a CMMC audit, or an ISO 27001, we will issue a major nonconformance because you have a glaring security breach on your network. Big thing here as to why we don't use end-of-life phones is end-of-life smartphones specifically, they can't receive corporate updates anymore. They typically, you can't remotely destroy the software. You can't make things stop. You're in a world of hurt if you're running an old machine that just doesn't support anymore. I know people don't want to be spending $1,000 every 3 to 5 years for the cell phone. The problem is that the patching, the updates, et cetera, after about 3 to 5 years, it's just not there. This is interesting. Non-Apple and non-Google phones, Google Pixels. And this is where I talked about earlier. So if you have a Samsung or Huawei or any one of the other cell phone providers out there, cell phone providers, or smartphone, not the service, but the actual device. If it's not an Apple or Google Pixel, there's two problems with getting updates. One is the predominance of the updates rely on the manufacturer of the phone, whether it's Samsung, Huawei, LG, whatever. It relies on the manufacturer. So it's compounded by the fact that the update and the software and the preloaded apps that are installed also come from the cell service provider. So whether it's AT&T, T-Mobile, Cricket, you pick it. The problem with anything other than Apple or Google Pixel is the manufacturer has certain parameters on it and the cell phone service provider has certain parameters. So the only time those phones get updates is when the manufacturer and the cell phone service provider get together and agree to those updates. So their updates are not quite as frequent. Those of you who have an Apple phone, you know about every 2 to 3 weeks, you're getting a push update of, hey, you need to update this is a security update. If you have a Samsung phone, you know that can be anywhere from 3 months to a year before you typically get the update. And Google, because Google, kind of like Apple, controls the entire platform, regardless of the cell phone, the Google Pixel phones are updated about as quickly and as fast as Apple phones. But even though, even on the Google Pixel, they're still only supporting those phones for about 3 to 5 years when they run out. This is Wandera is, by the way, a great source of information if you're ever looking for making your board or your union executives sweat about cybersecurity. This is the big one. They did a survey back in 2020, and they determined that 28% of all businesses are using outdated operating system and known cybersecurity vulnerabilities on their mobile devices. The biggest reason cited was the cost of the phones. The fact that the phone was costing them, $1,000 every 2 to 3 years to replace the phone and maintain them and keep them updated. The other component is that a lot of companies offer a service. They offer you $45 a month to pay for your cell phone bill, and you bring your phone to the company, which as a result, average American will hold on to a cell phone for 5 to 8 years, which puts it at the upper spectrum of where cell phones will operate. Any questions so far? I know I tend to brief really fast. We're about halfway through on our time, and we're probably going to have about 15 minutes left over at the end for Q&A if anybody's got them. I haven't seen anything pop up, so I'm going to keep going. The other area where poor passwords and security behavior come into play on mobile devices, and part of what ends up going on here is that this is a great one. About 50% of us on the call today, we have reused a password across multiple accounts. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I see this every time I do a cybersecurity audit. And I mean, my own family is guilty of this. What do you use to log into the bank? Oh, I use, my email and password 123. What do you use to log into the doctor's office? Email and password 123. The problem with that reuse of passwords across multiple accounts is that once that password and username combination has been compromised at least once, the hackers are smart. They know that more than half the people out there reuse the same username and password for everything. And so as a result, they start banging that. They take those combinations of known username and passwords that have been breached, and they throw them against just about every system out there. About 1/3 of all users do not use multi-factor. Now, this is more in the private sector. It's getting better and better. Most banks now require a multi-factor. You username and password, you log in, and it says, hey, I'm going to send you a text message. Give me that code. Or it forces you to use like a Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator, Duo, or one of the other authenticator programs. But still, fully 1/3 of the population out there is not using any kind of multi-factor. For the longest time, most banks allowed you to make that decision on your own. What we're seeing is now in 2025, because of some of the increases on banking regulation and the security financial sector have been placed, anticipate that here in 2025, your bank is going to tell you that it is now mandatory for you to use a multi-factor. I know it's a pain. I know you don't want to do it, but it is the most efficient way to secure somebody from getting into your account. And what it defeats is that multiple you can use when you use multi-factor. You can now use the same password and user account combo. I don't recommend it, but the multi-factor makes that a little bit safer. Still not a good way to do it. Less than 1 in 4 of us are using a password manager. One of the big things I used to see in the Department of Defense was employees would pull out an Excel file or a Word document, and they would put in every username and password and everything they could imagine. So periodically we would be scanning, we'd pick up one of those documents coming across the net, and they were going from their .mil to their Google, their gmail.com, would open it up and said, okay, there's their social security number, there's their bank account number, their login to the bank, their username and password. Oh, and there's all their travel accounts. It just goes on and on. And in some cases, like one case, we had actually 7 pages of this kind of information. The person just upchucked everything they could imagine for all their logins into a Word document and then emailed it to themselves in Gmail. We stopped it, thank goodness. But that's the kind of behavior that happens. They write it down. They don't use a password manager. There are free password managers out there. They're okay. There's paid for password managers. They're okay. The part of the password manager you want to make sure is that the password manager doesn't have the ability to have what's called a backdoor, that they can't, they clearly state that if you lose your username and password, or you lose your recovery key, you can never get into that system. That's what you want to hear. That's what you want to see. And more importantly, you want to see that it's been tested. I love this one. When they do password scanning, and this comes from Google. Google does this report about every year, and they talk about social engineering and getting into systems. 50% of all passwords contain a popular sport reference that is also on the person's social media. So if you're in DC and you're a Commanders fan, or and somewhere in there you're going to have the word Commander or something referencing that sports team in your username and password combination. Or if you're here in Texas, up in the Dallas area, you got the Cowboys, or you got the Oilers aren't here anymore. You got the Houston Stars. Again, people do it, but the most important part, it's not the fact that you use that as part of your password, but the fact that you have that on your social media. So all I have to do is look at Robert McVay. By the way, I don't use it, but you can look at Robert McVay, say, oh, he's a Dallas Cowboy fan. I am not. Don't mean to offend anybody. I'm just not a Dallas Cowboys fan. But if you looked on my profile and you said, oh, he's a Cowboys fan, and oh, he might have something to do with it. So they start building that social engineering packet about what I'm doing to figure out what my password is. This is interesting. Any of you ever get that email? You've signed up for like Experian or TransUnion or your bank or Discover, and they do the dark web search, and they come up and they pop this up. And by the way, if you have a password manager, they do it as well too. It pops it up and says, hey, we noticed that this username and password combination was recently identified in a breach and is out on the dark web. 70% of people who get those notices continue to use that same username and password combination, even on the system that it might have been used or taken in part of a breach. Boggles the imagination. But when you ask why, the bulk of them, well, that's the username and password I use for everything. I would have to change dozens or hundreds of systems to update that. Yeah, and you probably should have, because that's what's going to keep people out of your systems. But this is the kinds of behavior around poor passwords that gets companies into trouble. So the next time your company tells you that they're going to force you to change your username and password, and update your multi-factor every 90 days, I know you're not going to like it. I know you're going to complain about it. I know it's a pain, but do it, because it is what helps keep the company secure. I recommend you do it with your banking. If you do not have multi-factor enabled on your banking and your credit cards, I highly recommend that you make sure you do have it there. One of the other sources where people often say, well, what kind of information can get there? They go into like your airline system or your rental car system. The problem with using the airline and the rental car systems, because most of us have stored at least one credit card number in those systems. We've stored our driver's license in those systems. Now, most of the time they scramble it or only give you the last four, but that can often be just enough information to do something. Or, they can also just, in many cases, book flights or rent cars under your name that you haven't even thought about. And by the way, getting a fake driver's license to do a rental car, not that difficult anymore. Not to mention, most of the rental car companies don't have the scan capability to look back to the National Registry for driver's license. I love this one. Every single year, so everybody gets the, hey, you must update your password. We see this globally. We see this, and this again came from Google and Wandera. In any given year, more than 2 million passwords will contain the year. 2024, if you got a requirement to change your password, I have family members who do this. They call me and says, hey, I'm changing my password to password 2024. Why would you do that? Because they said I had to have a new password. Why are you picking 2024? Well, it says I have to have, a number. Okay, pick a number other than 2024, other than your birthday, other than your wife's birthday, your children's birthday, or your dog's birthday. Pick anything other than that number. But about 2 million people every year will continue to use the year that it is in their password. So it grows. This is an important one. Organizations that are trying to get into your system, they don't try to guess the password to get into your systems anymore. 80% of all business breaches originate with somebody stealing the credentials. They either got one of these username and passwords that was compromised. They got one of these username and passwords that, is repeated. Like I talked about, if you're using, I'll just pick on myself. If I'm using, robert.mcvay@gmail.com, password 123, and I use that for one or two systems, if it ever gets breached, the hackers will turn around and they'll say, Robert McVay works at Smithers. Let's try robert.mcvay@smithers.com and let's try password 123. Guess what? About 80% of the time, it's going to work because of the fact that 70% of us continue to reuse a compromised password, and 50% of us use at least the same password on multiple systems. So it's a problem. By the way, not changing the password, not updating the password, or getting a notification that a password has been expired and still using it in your system for an ISO 27001 is a major nonconformance for CMMC. It is grounds to fail your certification. This is the best one out there. Everybody says, well, I don't have that. Nope. I'm going to guarantee everybody on this call, and this again, Google and Harris came out with this in 2023, 100% of users using the internet in the United States have at least one password and username combination that has been stolen and is posted on the dark web. Everybody on today's conference, all 20-something of you, every one of you has a compromised username and password combination out there. So the next time you get that notice from a credit card or from a bank or from a password protector or credit reporting service that, hey, your username and password combo has been exposed, change it. Go figure out somewhere else to use it, but don't reuse it because you are part of the problem. Password strength. I love this chart. Everybody relies and says, well, you're going to be the group says, well, I'm down here. I have 18 characters and I have an upper lowercase and a symbol. According to the analysis, this is from MIT, and I think Caltech has done this a couple of times. This is the most recent one from MIT. Basically said if you have 18 characters and it's a combination of numbers, upper and lowercase letters, and at least one symbol, it's going to take about 438 trillion years to break your password. Now, the problem is 99.9% of the population does not have this kind of a password. The bulk of the population tends to be somewhere around here in the 10 characters to about 14 characters, and tends to have some repeatability, and tends to reuse it. So there's the probability that even if you had an 18-character password, it's been compromised. So what I offer to you is if you have an 18-character password and you bundle it with multi-factor, the probability of them getting into your account is pretty much approaching infinity. They're never going to, because every time they use the username and password combo, it asks for the multi-factor. The multi-factor fails. After about 3 to 5 attempts on the multi-factor failing, the multi-factor now starts locking up and saying, no more, I'm not helping you anymore. And in most cases, your user system is set for 5 to 10 failures, and then we lock you out for a minute. Like the iPhone, the lady a couple of years ago who locked herself out for 14 million minutes because she just kept trying and trying and trying. Well, that eventually will kick in, and so this will stop it. So there's some goodness. Multi-factor definitely will secure these passwords. There's a little problem. Anybody heard of quantum computing? Well, it scares the hell out of us, though, that do cybersecurity, and here's why. Here's what that matrix looked like with quantum computing. And right now, this is the latest. And basically what they're saying is that if you have a 20 qubit machine, don't ask me for the explanation of it, it makes my head hurt, that a 20 qubit machine, quantum computing machine, would be able to break a 2048-bit security in about 8 hours. Well, if you have this highest compilation, this 18 numbers or 18 characters or upper lowercase number letters and symbols, a quantum computer is going to break it in about a minute. So, what's the value at that point of having a password? Multi-factor, again, we're not sure what the impact of that's going to be, but it will definitely secure it. So quantum computing is a great thing, but quantum computing is going to make cybersecurity incredibly difficult. All right, let's move on to mobile ad fraud. We've all gotten these. If you have a Samsung, a Droid operating system, you get them a little bit more often than you do on Apple. Why is mobile ad fraud hard? Mobile ad fraud becomes even harder on our mobile devices, typically because it's a cell phone. Tablets and computers, not so much of a difficulty, but it's harder because of the size of the screen and the limited visibility. How many of you have gotten a document, full-size document, and you have to scroll around and move it around on the screen in order to be able to see it on your computer screen because you're like me and you have eyes that cannot read 3-point font any longer. So as a result, mobile ad fraud is really simple to do, and they leverage the fact that it's limited screen space. They have limited ability for you to move it around, and in many cases, it pops up in a way that you've actually got to click through the fraud in order to get back to your operating computer because you can't minimize screens as well on mobile devices. What we're looking for in mobile ad fraud is typically they install software from unapproved sites. And for those of you with Droid phones, it's software coming in from anything other than Google Play, or in the case of an Apple, it's anything other than the Apple Store. Now, if you have an Apple, software won't install unless it comes through the App Store. The problem is that some App Store apps have been compromised. They try to catch them, but sometimes they get through. Same thing on Google Play. They try to stop it. So anytime you're downloading any kind of software to put on your mobile devices, always go to one of the approved stores. Google Play for Droid, Apple for Apple apps. That's kind of redundant. Go to them, largely because they've done at least the basic testing. They've certified that these software and these software packages and these apps aren't doing anything nefarious at the highest level. They do their best to try and secure them, so you're likely to not get a problem with them. Now, Android, Samsung, and anything other than Apple or other than Google Pixel, you do have a little bit of a problem with Android phones, and that is Android phones give the user the ability to turn off third-party APKs or applications. And basically what it is that's what's called either side channeling or adding apps that don't come from the Google Play Store. 99.9% of us never need to turn this setting on. In a corporate setting, do not turn this setting on. In fact, if you have the ability to lock your employees out on a corporate ad phone, do not give them the ability to add software that doesn't come from Google Play or the App Store. Corporate machines, in many cases, you can actually set up your own version of the App Store with Apple or with Google, where your employees on a corporate machine have to log into that, and only the apps that you allow are installed in that store and can be downloaded to the computer. Nothing else is available for them. Now, most companies don't do that. If you only have 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 employees, you're probably not going to do that. If you have 1,000 or more employees, highly recommend, especially if you issued the phones to your employees, highly recommend that you have that app store set up so that your employees can add apps, add functionality to their device, their mobile device, but you know what's on those phones. And make sure you definitely have the third-party APKs turned off. Then there's there's nasty things. It's called ad stacking. This is a real common problem for Droid phones. And that is the app pops up and the app has been either compromised or the app is doing this intentionally. And what it does is it puts multiple ads on top of each other, and you can't get to what you're trying to do until you go through them or you close them. And in many cases, they'll place it so strategically that you don't even realize you're clicking on the accept button for that app or that ad without even realizing you're not looking at the right one. Click injection and spamming, you get that one. Hey, quick survey, please click on this for me real quick. Again, don't do that. What they're basically doing is they're getting you to go to a clickbait site. They're wanting you to do that. They're hoping that you will add the application and or do the problem form. Device ID reset, not a problem with Apple because Apple doesn't work this way. It is a problem for Droid and Google phones. And basically you have a piece of software, an application that maybe you downloaded legitimately, or maybe you didn't. And what it does is it makes an update to itself. And most of those kinds of updates require the phone to be reset. And so what it'll do is it'll either automatically reset it or say, hey, we've updated the software in your phone. We need you to reset or restart your phone. And the moment you do that, you have just allowed that software to populate and expand across your platform. So if you didn't get any of that adware that keeps popping up and you can't seem to get away and you're on a Droid phone, it's probably because at some time you installed one of those apps that allowed it to happen. And so as a result, the problem you have now is that in most cases, the only way to fix that is you're going to have to uninstall every app, actually reset your phone to factory, and then go back and reinstall the individual apps one at a time. Because if you do the auto push for apps back, that bad app will get back into your phone. So again, problems with systems out there. They're loving it. The geographical ad malware, this is where they're starting to mess with your GPS. One of the most common ones of this one, and a couple apps have done this for years. Starbucks app will do this too if you have the GPS turned on. The Starbucks app, as you're walking by and you get within a quarter mile, I think is the distance. Sometimes it changes, but typically if you get within a quarter mile of a Starbucks, it'll pop up and say, hey, you haven't ordered a caramel macchiato in the last 2 weeks. There's a Starbucks right around the corner from you. And that's a little bit problematic. The other one is that Walmart uses Wi-Fi tracking and geo tracking to figure out where you wander in their store. And so they start popping up ads that say, hey, we notice you're in the, paper products. When's the last time you bought paper towels? Those kinds of things start popping up on your phones. That's a geographic fraud. It's not necessarily fraud, but it's a method by which nefarious actors can get into your system and get those kinds of pop-ups, kind of like the Starbucks where they'll spoof it, or the Walmart where they'll spoof it and you'll click on it. We talked about this several times, installing fraudulent adware. Again, a real problem for Droid phones more so than Apple. Apple can get it, but typically as soon as the Apple Store realizes that somebody has allowed one of their apps to be compromised like that, they not only remove it from the Apple Store, but they install patches. The next time you update the security in your system, it will go away. Google and Ponyman did a survey back in 2023 and made an estimate that right now, on average, we as humans will, in the United States, we will click on about 24 billion clicks onto 700 of the adware networks, which are in some cases nefarious and in some cases good. But basically about 24 billion times, we will click on about 700 of the best and widely known ad apps in the ecosystem across all devices. So this is both Droid as well as iPhones. So we're doing a lot of clicking. I would offer in many cases, think before you click. It's kind of like clicking on an email, spear phishing, think before you click. Physical device breaches. Everybody says, well, I know where my phone is. I have tracking on my phone. Yeah. About 35% of the corporations out there today, the corporate devices out there, have no mandatory security controls. They're not enforcing it. I'm going to tell you, if you're an ISO 27001 or you're a CMMC client and you have corporate devices with no mandatory controls on, you just got yourself a major nonconformance. And if you're CMMC, you just got yourself an audit failure. There is no way that a mobile device, whether it's a laptop, a tablet, or a cell phone, there is no way you can not have one of those devices out there that doesn't have some sort of corporate mandated security controls on it. There's a laundry list of them. But About 35% of the companies out there aren't doing it, or 35% of all the corporate cell phones, smart devices, laptops, etc., have no mandatory controls on it. This drives me crazy. 50% of all devices, mobile devices, cell phones, laptops, tablets, 50% of all of them out there do not have a password, a PIN, or a biometric lock on them. I have gotten on my teenagers and finally convinced my teenagers that they needed to put at least the minimum of a PIN on their cell phones. When they argued with me about it, it was a real simple fix. I got on there and I picked a whole group of their friends and sent, a spurious email to their friends, and their friends like, what the heck? That email made no sense. And all of a sudden my kids like, how'd that happen? I said, you left your cell phone sitting on the kitchen table unlocked. And so suddenly they put them on there. Again, this, if you're going through a certification for cybersecurity, this is again a major no-no. At a minimum, to put a PIN, a 4-digit or a 6-digit PIN on all these devices will have a timeout. On an Apple Android, you can only enter it so many times before it starts locking you out by the minute, by the hour, by the day, by the week, by the century. Put a minimum a PIN. Don't have to have a password, a PIN, or at a minimum, put the biometrics. At least something on your phone. Problem with biometrics, though, is that somebody can pick up your phone, put it in front of your face. That's a little hard to do. It used to be with your thumb. Or your phone is unlocked. That's not going to stop somebody from breaching your system. More than 2/3 of all the mobile computing devices, again, computers, tablets, and cell phones, more than 2/3 of them out there have no data at rest encryption. Basically meaning that you may have a username and password to get into it, but I don't need to use your username and password to get into it. In many cases, all I need to do is pull the hard drive out of the computer, pop it into, I have the devices like here in my home office. I have a device that I can plug a hard drive into. And if you don't have data at rest encryption, yep, you'll keep me from logging into your computer. But if there's no encryption on the hard drive, I'll pop that hard drive into one of these readers and I can read everything on the hard drive. 2/3 of all computers out there, 2/3 of all mobile devices don't have data at rest. Apple, pretty simple, turn on File Vault. Droid, turn on the hard drive lock. BitLocker on most Intel machines is the name of the software. Just turn it on. It's simple. It's free. It's part of the installation of the software. More importantly, what it does mean that if somebody does get a hold of your device, they can keep the device. They can't get into the device, and more importantly, they can't get to your underlying data in the device. This one drives me crazy as a cybersecurity auditor and cybersecurity professional. 68% of the businesses, this is from a Google survey in 2022, 68% of surveyed businesses admitted to sharing accounts, both a password and a username, both on personal devices as well as corporate devices. If you're seeking a cybersecurity certification, this is a big no-no. In fact, we talk about not only separation of duties, but we talk about protection of accounts. So don't do it. A lot of people at home, they do the same thing. I'll be honest, my wife and I have one Netflix account. We use the same shared password for it. Why? Because some things aren't worth protecting as much. But it's a bad habit to get into. And so as a result, you want to stay away from those as much as possible on your personal devices, but absolutely in a corporate setting, you should never share username and passwords under any conditions. Now, how many devices get lost? Well, here's the results from 2023 and 2022. 63% of all the lost devices were somebody misplaced it. I've had the privilege of having 5 children, and I've bought 4 phones for, I left my phone on the bus or the airplane, or I don't remember where I left it, but it got lost. So about 63% are misplaced. About 14% are from home invasions, 4% from business break-ins. Not surprising, a home invasion that smash and grab, they go in, they grab computers, tablets, cell phones, great. Pickpockets, about 10%. The pickpockets has been slowly sliding down year after year. Robberies account for about 5% and car break-ins for about 3.5%. Really surprised when I saw the car break-ins being so low, because so many times we hear about, businesses saying, oh yeah, my computer was in the back of my car. They broke into the car and they stole it. This is one of the reasons that, always recommend that if you're getting a car, don't get an SUV, or if you get an SUV, have the one that has the cover that covers the back so they can't see what's in the back of the car, or get a car with a trunk, again, protecting the device. So you definitely want, they're going to get stolen. I'm not sure I believe this number. I think it's higher, but essentially, excuse me, Federal Communications, excuse me, FCC put out that in 2023, about 3.1 million cell phones are lost every year. Find that a little hard to believe, given that there's 312 million cell phones at any given time. This is, 1%. I'm not sure I believe this number, but it's at least the best number we've got. So probability is somebody in your company or somebody in your family is going to lose a cell phone at some point. And again, by the way, if you're doing cybersecurity, you definitely want to wrap this one up. Okay. I'm a little over time. I apologize for that. I got excited here. I'm going to do this one real quick. This is this typical 80-20 Pareto. 20% of the effort will result in 80% of the benefit. Cybersecurity is no different. Top things to do in cybersecurity. You can address every one of the problems we just discussed in today's seminar. You can fix every one of these by basically doing 6 simple things. 1, train your employees. 2, enforce authentication, both of your networks as well as using multi-factor. Authorize your people, know what systems your people are on, know what data they have access to, make sure they can only install software they're allowed to. Hold your people accountable. Know what your people are doing on your networks. If you have a device out there, you have a machine out there, and you don't know what your employees are doing on it, shame on you. Continuous monitoring. Again, if it's a corporate machine, it should be monitored at all times. Anytime it connects to the internet, anytime it's hooked to a network. And then the last one, to get around 90% of all cybersecurity breaches, have a business continuity plan. Have a backup and safeguards in your system to make sure that if the data is compromised or if the data is malwared and locked up, like with ransomware, you have a method to get around it. Most of these are fairly inexpensive measures to take, and most of them will reduce the cost of a cybersecurity breach significantly. And with that, I do apologize for running over. If you have any additional questions about cybersecurity in general, or you want to discuss ISO 27001, which is the commercial standard for cyber, or CMMC, which is the Department of Defense standard for cyber, please reach out to myself or Marjorie and let us know you'd like an opportunity to encounter. You can also scan the QR code here. This is a safe QR code, by the way. You can scan this QR code and directly set up something on our calendars. And with that, I do apologize for going over, but I've definitely got a few minutes. If there are any other questions, and if not, we'll wrap this one up.
And just to let everyone know, this should be posted to our website in the resources section by the end of the week.
Okay, we've got a question. If employees are on a company Wi-Fi on personal devices, can they access company data or information? Follow-up, is it okay to have an employee Wi-Fi network or best to allow no access? Okay, so let's get to the very first one. If an employee is on a company Wi-Fi on a personal device, first off, personal devices should never be allowed on the corporate network. If you are going to allow personal devices to connect to the Wi-Fi in your company, have a separate Wi-Fi, have a separate guest network that is completely separate from your corporate network, because that will keep them from accessing company documents and information. I know it sounds crazy, but in many cases, what we'll do is we'll allow them to connect that device to the, to the guest network, and that protects the data on the corporate network. Does that address your question? Okay. Any other? Yeah, perfect. Any other questions, folks? All right. Well, perfect. I thank everybody for your time and patience today. I appreciate you letting me go 5 minutes over. As I said before, if you have any questions in cyber general, or you're looking for anything on a specific certification in cybersecurity, please reach out to myself or Marjorie, set something up on our calendars. We are always happy to help educate. And with that, thank you very much. And I hope to see all of you next month at our next cybersecurity webinar. And Marjorie, what are we doing next month?
The topic has not been decided upon yet, but it will be good and juicy. We can promise that.
Or if there's a topic, if you attend today and there's a topic you'd like to hear, shoot Marjorie or me a note. We'll definitely take a look at it for applicability across the broader. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. And with that, we're going to close out. Thank you.